Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning in April. The sun is shining outside. What a perfect day to sit in front of the computer and do some airport building for XPlane. I have a coffee right here, so let's get going with issue number 2 of the tutorial video series. This one is called Preparing Your Airport for Construction. And I just want to briefly go back to video number 1, where I mentioned the interactive map for airports in XPlane. It's this one here at xplane.cleverest.eu. You can see the whole world here, and you see all the airports that are in the XPlane world, and they come with different colors and different symbols. It's pretty simple. The yellow ones that have a little star, that's the best state. That means they were enhanced by a developer. They have 3D assets, and if you click on one of them, you get a little map, and you can basically see the layout as it is in XPlane, and there's little symbology here. The blue parts, those are buildings that are available for LPAZ Santa Maria. And you can filter the map. You can say, I want to see only the airports that have 3D, and there's some really old ones. I did a lot of these here in Germany before the Scenery Gateway actually became active. So they are developer enhanced. They do have 3D assets. However, they're not really considered gateway airports, and you would see them as wetbot, even though they are fleshed out. But most of these are either orange or red, which means they are available at the Scenery Gateway, but not in XPlane yet. They are slated to be inserted at a later point. And this is what our airport KTTA will look like. You can search for it here. And then you would see that it doesn't show up. Why is that? Because we clicked only 3D. And if we go back to 2D and 3D, there it is here in North Carolina. And you can zoom in, of course. And here is the airport. And if you click on it again, you would see that's what we saw before. And this is basically a nifty tool to find airports, to get an overview. If I clear this out again, you would get all the airports again, and you can see here as you zoom out in the United States, there's still a lot of airports that have not been improved. A lot of these are actually not existent anymore. You'll zoom in and you'll see, well, there used to be an airport, maybe it's just a field or maybe just some grass. And of course, you could file that as a bug report, and then they would clear that out. And that's something that I sometimes do if I work on an area and I just want to get rid of all these old remnants. Basically, years ago, they scanned the FAA database and included everything they could find. So it's pretty comprehensive, but not really up to date. But you can also see that there's some regions of the world, Germany, and here Sweden or so, where if you go to only 2D and you want to see just the airports that have not been improved, these countries come up pretty much blank, because all the airports have been worked on by designers. Look at Italy, look at Norway, Sweden. These guys have been really busy. Iceland is one of the first countries that had no old airports left, and that's where what we want to get at eventually, that all the airports are either cleared out if they're not existent anymore, or enhanced with 3D assets. So let's get working. The purpose of this video is that we want to import our airport, the state that it's in right now, get it ready for our construction, for our working on it, and then save it again so that we can see it in XPlane. And that's, of course, important during the course of this tutorial series, that we always check back and explain how things look in the simulator, and that we can view our progression that way. The first thing that you want to do is you want to check your airport state in XPlane. And of course, we looked at it in the simulator. That's probably what you will do when you first happen upon it, and then you want to launch the gateway again. You want to log in after you have set that up. And now that you logged in, you would look for you don't have to log in to do this, but you have to be logged in for the thing that we'll do next. And you go to KTTA. That's the airport that we want to work in. You don't have to click go, it comes up automatically and you just click on the airport name. And we saw that yesterday. It hasn't been improved since 2015. And now here comes the new thing that we'll do. You look at the checkout details. You see that Sanford Lee Regional is unclaimed, which means hopefully no one is working on it. And you can read what this says for yourself. And I'll click on checkout. And you see now it's currently checked out by Lityan. I got a couple weeks time, and you can either return the checkout if you don't want to work on it anymore, or you can extend it, but only within a few days. So you can just click extend for a couple of times and have it saved for yourself for a couple of years. Doesn't work that way. It's a delicate balance between someone checking it out and then not working on it, and then someone else who would work on it doesn't do so because it's checked out. So they figured, it's checked out until July, which is 3 months. And if someone doesn't touch it by then or extends the checkout, then it goes back to unclaimed and the next guy can try. So this is the first thing that you want to do. And the next thing that you would do is go to the Scenery Development Forum, go to the Scenery Gateway, and then you would search here for KTTA maybe in this forum and click on search. And then the search should come up blank. It does maybe, otherwise, you would get the relevant thread and they would say, hey, I'm working on it, and that's what we'll do now. I'll start a new topic, and I call it the title, working on, we can clear this one, working on KTTA. Hi everyone, I start working on KTTA. Sanford Lee Regional. This is part of the new tutorial series for WED. Stay tuned for some pics. Cheers. Yeah, that's enough. And now anyone else who fails to see that it's claimed on the gateway may happen upon this thread here and see that I'm working on it, and hopefully we don't duplicate our work. Now we are ready to get going. I'll collapse this and I'll start WED, and while it boots, you can see these are the airports that we have in our custom scenery folder, and we want to make a new scenery package. And when I click that, it comes up as untitled. Now click here on untitled, and I like to call my airports KTTA Sanford Lee. You can call that whatever you want, name of your grandmother or whatever. This has no relevance. This is the name that the folder will have that gets created now. I return, and if you look at XPlane here, oops, it takes a while until my external hard disk starts up and I can click stuff. Working on it here, custom scenery, and you can see it made KTTA Sanford Lee. This is just the name of the folder. It's not relevant for XPlane really, but that's what I like to do it for, or the way I like to do it for organizational reasons. And now that we have Sanford Lee, we can click Open Scenery Package, and it comes up totally blank. Why is this? Because this is the airport I worked on last, and WED has nothing to load really. If you go back here at the custom scenery folder and Sanford Lee, and we open this, this is totally empty. WED has no data to load right now. And if you look at other airports, for example, Hannover that I just worked on, there are a couple files in this folder for Hannover, most importantly the earth.wed.xml. This is the file that WED needs to show you anything in this main window. This is the WED file. It is not read by XPlane. This is an important distinction, and this is kind of boring, but it's very important. There are a couple files that we will create during our work with WED. The first one will be the Earth WED XML. They're all called Earth WED XML, and this is what tells WED what to show you, where the runways are, where the taxiways are, where everything is. It contains what's there and where it is and what orientation and so on. So this is what we would need for to see something in WED. Once you've done that and load your XPlane in, your airport in XPlane, nothing would show because XPlane cannot read this XML. XPlane can read Earth nav data. It needs the Earth nav data folder, and then it can read the airport DAT. This is the old file that has been in existence for years and years and years. This contains the runways, the taxiways, some lines, some windsocks, stuff like that, and also the data for the airport itself, how what the elevation is, and so on. And then there's the slightly newer file, which is in a folder called +50+00, which denotes the latitude and the longitude where this DSF file is in. And if I open this, you can see the DSF file. And the DSF file contains many, many other things like the buildings, the facades, lots of stuff goes into the DSF file. This is the more modern file, but basically to show the complete airport, both types of assets, the old ones and the new ones, your airport will need an Earth nav data folder, and in the Earth nav data folder you will need an airport DAT, and also, if you want to have a good airport with objects and so on, you would need the folder that denotes latitude and longitude and the DSF file. Don't worry about it. WED will create all this for you when we work on the airport. But I'll mention this again and again because it's an important distinction to make. A lot of people say, well, I saved my airport and I can't see it in XPlane. And what all they do is they save the XML file, which is fine for WED, but not for XPlane. And to actually create these files, you'll need to export your scenery pack. But we'll come back to that later. This you've seen this now. Now it's time to actually start on the correct airport. You can see here the ILS and NDBs and so on. This is because, a little jumping ahead myself here, I have the toggle nav aids checked. New feature in WED 2.0, very, very handy. And you can see nothing because I don't have the world map, and I'll toggle the world map. And if I zoom out, you can see that I'm here in Germany, in Hanover. That's not where I want to be. We want to go to North Carolina. I actually lived there in '87 for 3 months. A very, very nice place. And we lived in Chapel Hill. That's kind of like why I looked in that area. And Chapel Hill Airport is already done, so I picked Sanford Lee. Let's start, and the normal way you will start your airport, the old way is you could go to airport, create airport, and then you can basically build your own airport anywhere. But there was another way where you would import an airport DAT. If there's no XML file for WED, you could do that, import the airport DAT, import a DSF, and then you would also have your airport show up in WED. But these are old ways to do it, and this is not the recommended way if you build airports for XPlane Scenery Gateway. What we want to do is we want to import the airport from the Scenery Gateway. This guarantees that you're working with the latest available issue of this airport, that it's built on that issue, that you don't build it on a very old design, and we want to have some continuity. So this is what you will basically always do. If an airport that you want to build is not available on the Scenery Gateway, there is a way to request this airport getting added to the database, and then you can work on it. But that's advanced and not really what would be the case in 99% of making an airport. So we're looking for KTTA. There it is, Sanford Lee Regional. Just click on it and you go next. And now it will show you all the different versions. For this one, we only have this one, but we saw JFK and it had lots of versions. You can pick which one you want to work on, which is naturally always the recommended one. So I click on recommended, import packs. It takes a second and whoops, here it is. If I zoom out, you can see we jumped to North Carolina. Little airplane here is where the airport is. And as you zoom in, I'm using my mouse wheel to do that. You can see the airport. Now, a very brief introduction of WED and its windows. Up here you have the, I call that the library window. You have the library of stuff. If you get these little arrows here, they show that this is a folder. You can open it, and if it turns downwards, that means that this folder is open. There's nothing in local, so nothing happens. But if I open library, you can see there's lib, and if I open lib, you can see, oh, there's airports, buildings, cars, constructions, and so on. And if I open airport, you can see there aircraft, balloons, beacons, and so on and so on. We'll get to all this later, but this is where you find the stuff that you want to build with. And down here is the preview window. I'll show you that one real quick as well. If I go to, let's say, balloons, and I want to pick balloon 1, here it is, and I can use my mouse, click, left click, and move, and then you can rotate it. You can zoom in with the mouse wheel as well, and or you can use the right mouse button to hold and return as well. And you get some info. You get the max height below ground, which is important if you want to set buildings on a sloped area, for example. This one doesn't go to below ground very far, but some of the buildings have a foundation, and or if you look at trees, you want to see how high they are, and this is handy information as well. Here you have a section of little buttons that you can push. For example, this one is for the Vertex tool. You can see here Vertex, which means if you want to, I get this little mouse cursor, and if I click, I can click on this little, this is what we call a vertex. This denotes this corner here of this taxiway, and if I I can select these stuff with drawing, either clicking directly on it or drawing a little selection box, and I have these two selected. And if I do use the vertex or the marquee tool and I select them, you can see that everything is also selected, but as I add more to it, you can see that this marquee, this area is getting bigger, and this will come in handy later on. I'll show you, but this is where you switch between, either with the V key or with the M button key, or you can just click right here. This is where you would place a runway, this is where you place a helipad, this is where you taxiway lines, you can make holes, place lights, place the tower viewpoint, ramp starts, and so on. This is all going to be explained later, but this is where you select that stuff. Here is the organizational window. I don't really have a name. They have a name for it, but this is where all the stuff that you have in your airport shows up. And you can see we have the Sanford Lee Regional. This is the main airport. It's actually under the world, and you could theoretically have many airports in one project, but that is of course not something that we would want to do. Keep it simple, just work on one airport at the time. And if I open Sanford Lee, you can see it has different folders inside. They're all open now. The arrows are pointing downwards, so you can see everything that's there. And if you click on something here, you can see the properties down here in the property tab. If I click on the beacon, you can see the name, what it is, if it's locked or not, if it's hidden or not, the latitude, the longitude, and the type of beacon. And you can change properties here. For example, I click on windsock, and if I zoom out a little bit, you will see that the thing that I click here also gets highlighted here. You can see this is this windsock. If I click here, this is this windsock, and I can change the properties. For example, I can change it to lit or unlit, and I could change the latitude and longitude here, but of course it's much easier to hold it with your Vertex tool, hold it, click, and move it around. You can see the latitude, longitude changing at the same time, and this is how you would manipulate stuff. And if you don't want to see all the windsocks, you can just collapse them again, and this makes everything a little more organized. There are many shortcuts. For example, if you want to see this windsock and you zoomed in all the way, you can find it. You hit Control 7 and it jumps to this one. And if you go to view, for example, you can see here zoom selection. This is Control 7 on my viewpad, but this is we have lots and lots of shortcuts and functionality here in WED that makes working with this airport fairly easy. Now, for the purpose of this video, we saw enough of this. I'm collapsing all these, and also what I like to do once I import an airport, I lock everything. So I click on the first one, just like you would do in Windows. You hold down the Shift key, click on the last one, or you could, just like in Windows, hit Control and pick whatever you want to pick. But and if you click again, you would change the name. You could easily change the ATC folder's name to, again, the name of your grandmother if you choose so. But you can make up your own names, and I do that later on. You'll see lots of folders here that have organizational names that makes keeping track of where everything is a lot easier. But for now, I just This is the default folder names that you would get on importing an airport. And this is also important to remember if you have an airport and you have all these nice folder names and you upload it to the Scenery Gateway, and then a year later you say, well, I want to work on it again. You download it again from the Scenery Gateway, then all your folder names are gone. The Scenery Gateway will rename everything, reorganize everything. So markings, for example, these are all the lines. I have vehicle lines, I have taxi lines, I have stand lines, and this is the way I name it. But once I import my airport, everything will be in one folder called markings. Yeah, we debated that, but that's just the way it is, and I guess that's what you'll have to deal with. And of course, you can sort these, and later on, if you have to make your own folders again. For now, I'm selecting all of them, and this is also an important wet convention. I hold down the Control key, and that means I'm changing the properties of everything selected down here. So you can resize these windows. You can see these are all the groups, all the folders that I have selected here. And I could just click this one close, and this one open again, this one open. You can see the little lock turns red and to the locked symbol. But if I hold Control and click one, then all of these change. Same with hidden. If I hide all of these with Control, then the airport it's still there, but it's not visible right now. If I unhide that again, you can see that everything changes at the same time, which is also a very convenient feature. And by locking that, I preclude myself from selecting it. See, I cannot select this windsock anymore. I can't select all of these. This precludes me from moving them accidentally. So this is what I like to do. I have most of my airport locked, and that way, especially when it gets more detailed, more complex, that avoids moving things by accident. Now that we've done that, I want to check back on my little script here. I want to show you the properties of the airport. This is also what belongs here in the first video. By the way, if you ever lose, sometimes it happens when you click somewhere, you jump to some total different way. You can of course zoom out and find your airport that way, but if you just like I showed you, click on Sanford Lee, let's say we're down here somewhere in Mississippi, and you just hit Control and the slash again, then you jump back right to your airport, or you can choose it here under view. Anyway, if I click on the airport name, I have the airport name highlighted. You can see the airport properties. You have the name, you have the class, if it's locked or not. I don't want to lock the whole airport. I could do that as well, but later on, then I could not unlock the taxiways. I'd have to unlock the whole airport first and then have access to the taxiways again. So that's not what I do. And you can see the type you could choose. You could make it a heliport or a seaport, the field elevation, if it has ATC or not. And when I start working on an airport, this is the first thing that I like to set up correctly. And for example, the field elevation, that's something that I would check. And I would, oh, there he is again. I would go to Sky Vector for this right now and go to KTTA like we did yesterday. And then you can see that the elevation is 246.5. Well, that's for this runway. Let's see if we have another where we can see how high the whole thing is. Oh, here it is. Surveyed elevation is 246 feet MSL. Now, I'm in meters, but as I showed you yesterday, it would probably make sense to switch to feet for this one real quick. And here it is. It says 247, and here it says 246. So this is very, very, very wrong. And of course, we'll change it immediately to have a most accurate airport right here. And the field elevation is not that important unless you flatten your airport. That's the next thing that I'm going to jump to that. So we'll go down here, but let's jump to flatten. The airport will be placed upon the surface of the Earth as it is existing in XPlane. XPlane has a digital elevation model. It models the undulations of the Earth, the mountains, the valleys, and everything. And It also, during scenery creation, every time a new version of XPlane comes out, they run an algorithm that says, hey, there's an airport and the airport has a boundary. So we assume that within this boundary, we shouldn't have really any steep cliffs or gorges or so. That, you know, there may be a ridgeline running here due to the digital elevation model. Of course, they don't have a data point every few inches to save space. So it could happen that if you have an airport that where there has none been before, that the elevation or the terrain is pretty rough. It may be too rough for an airport to taxi, and if that happens, then you could click always flatten. But use that with care. There's one of the nicest features in XPlane. I'm a pilot in real life, and you will rarely find a runway which is totally flat, which is totally horizontal. They always go up or down a little bit, some pretty obviously or severely. And that's an important aspect of flying an airplane and landing and taking off. So don't rob users of the experience by flattening your airport. Even if some remote part of the apron may not be, you know, flat enough to taxi on, it will be after you place the boundary and after XPlane 12 comes out, where they run the algorithm again to flatten everything inside the airport boundary. We'll get to that one later. But for now, if you click always flatten, the airport will be at 246 feet for a huge radius, also taken away nearby hills and everything. This is like dropping the bomb right here. We don't want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary to take off and land on this runway. And airport ID, this is different from the ICAO ID. This is an important thing to grasp. Let's go back to the scenery gateway, and let's go back to KTTA, and you can see up here, if I click on it, I'm not logged in, doesn't matter. Okay, you can see here's the scenery ID, and this is not a good example, but it's important to, wasn't that yesterday in KJFK? Bear with me here for a second. I'm making this up as I go. Here we go. The airport has a different set of properties. There's an airport name, obviously, an airport identifier, and XPlane. Now for JFK, this is all KJFK, KJFK. This is an airport, obviously big one with an ICAO identifier, but there are many airports in the world that don't even have an ICAO identifier, and we used to make up our own, but what happens right now in XPlane, we have an airport identifier. This could be any set of characters. It doesn't have to be the ICAO code. It could be something else, and we also don't want to change that. The airport at this site will always be KJFK, even if they change the ICAO identifier. They sometimes do that as military airports turn civil or whatever. The airport identifier is supposed to stay static from now on. And for most airports, it's the same as the ICAO identifier. And then there's an IATA identifier and also an FAA identifier in this case, which would not be the case for airports in other parts of the world, obviously. But that's important to understand. The airport identifier is unique to the airport and will not change. Well, never say never, but it should never change again in in XPlane. Now, this is our airport ID. We don't want to do always flatten. I made this joke before, left-hand driving, I'll leave this unchecked. This is the scenery ID. This will change with our submission. We're basing our submission on this one, but once we upload it to the scenery gateway, we'll get a new scenery ID, which keeps the different submissions. We saw that here in JFK. You can see the scenery ID here. Every submission has its own scenery ID. That's how we can totally keep them separated and know which ones we're talking about, especially when you start the discussion here and file bug reports and stuff like that. The next thing is the so-called metadata. All these ones with a little red cross here are is data that is attached to this airport, which makes it easier to find it in XPlane. And you can see there's no IATA code, for example. You could, if you know one, you can just add it here. And the easy way to do it is to go to airport and you go update metadata. You click and it immediately and miraculously downloads everything that it knows about this airport, which isn't anything it didn't know before. But for now, we'll leave this untouched. And even if we change the name later on to what they go by now, the executive jet, then you could still find it by typing in city Sanford, because that's where it's at. And this is why it's nifty to have all this metadata. It makes it easy to find airports and handle them in the database. So once this is to our satisfaction, I will think about changing the name right now. You know what? Let's do this. This is clicked on the wrong button here. Clumsy me. Let's open SkyVector again and find the correct name of this airport as it stands now. Now the naming of airports has gone through some wild times as well. Here's the name. It's the Raleigh. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm just going to paste it right here. So for now, there's a certain limit on length of names, and we'll touch upon validation later. We'll clear the airport already. I'm going to make this one small, at Sanford Lee County, and I'm just going to abbreviate this regional. There we go, regional. So like this, and we'll see if XPlane likes it. Maybe this is too long, because if you have these really long names, then they don't show up well in the search boxes, in the menus, and so on. So we'll just go with this for now, and later, once Wet starts complaining about it, I'm going to abbreviate this more. Excuse me, another sip of coffee before it goes totally cold, and let's go on. What we want to do now is we want to save what we have so far. Every time you click on File, Save, save the XML file. I'll do this for the first time, and let's check if it worked. I'm opening my XPlane custom scenery again. I'm going to KTTA, Sanford Lee, and there it is, Earth Wet XML. The next time I'll save it, there will be a second file. Let's do this. I'm going to save it again. Let's pretend I worked for a little bit. Well, nothing has changed. I'm going to put in the city here, change something just for the sake of changing something, and I click File, Save again. And if I look back at this one, you can see now there's a second one. This is the last one I saved, and then there's the backup file, which does come in handy sometimes. Of course, Wet has the feature to go back when you work, Control Z, a few steps, but sometimes you really mess something up, and just going back a few steps doesn't save you, and then having this backup file, or if it becomes corrupt or so, for whatever reason, having a backup file might come in pretty handy. And now that we saved our airport, let's big question here, or little question here, what would happen if I fire up XPlane and look at it? Would the windsock be at the new spot, yes or no? Well, the obvious answer is no. We would still see the Sanford Lee Airport that is now contained in XPlane in the global airports folder inside the custom scenery folder, because we have not exported our project, our airport, into XPlane yet. And let's see what happens if we do that. When you export an airport, before you do that, it's important to set the correct export target. This is something that a lot of new people stumble over. If you open the export target tab, you get to pick all these different versions of XPlane, all the way back to version 9. And of course, every version has its own prerequisites, its own things that you have to have in your airport to have it approved. The highest rating that you could get is Airport Scenery Gateway. They will only accept the newest and most up-to-date stuff with regards to validation, which is what I'm going to explain to you now. Or you could pick one of the old ones. I like to pick Airport Scenery Gateway because that's what I want to do eventually anyway. And when I do that, when I try to export my scenery pack. I'm not going to do that now. What I'll do first is I will validate. When I hit export scenery airport, it will validate anyway, but you can trigger this manually, Control-Shift-V, and chances are when you have an airport and you download it from the scenery gateway and you click validate, right away this window will come up, validation result list, and this will now tell you what wet things is wrong with the airports and what would cause Julian to say, nope, your airport isn't good, I can't really include it into XPlane. And for example, the first one is airport name is longer than 30 characters. We just talked about that. Then the runway 03 threshold is not within 10 meters of location mandated by gateway. CIFP, that's the coded instrument flight procedures. This is the official data, and you can always zoom to the issue if you don't know where the problem is, and you can see it zoomed to the runway. And if I zoom in here, you can say this is where the runway end should be. It gives you a little area of uncertainty because nothing is ever perfect, but it's clearly outside. Obviously the other side is okay, but this one isn't correct, so we'll have to fix that later. This airport contains runways but no airport boundary. We have to have an airport boundary if we want to upload to the scenery gateway. This airport has ground or delivery but no tower, and so on. So this is a problem as well. And then we get, these are all errors. You have to fix them before you upload, and then you get a warning, and it says warning runway 03 end not within 10 meters. There's an end to the runway and a threshold to runway. This is an important distinction when it comes to having displaced thresholds and stuff like that. And this is just a warning because sometimes this data isn't correct in the CIFP, so you can waive that and upload anyway after you check that carefully. But for now, we need to dismiss and edit our scenery, but we don't want to jump ahead and start adding stuff now that is going to be handled in the next videos. What we'll do for now, we'll just step back. We'll just go to, let's say 11:30. We'll run the validation again. And it says error, this airport has ground or delivery but no tower. And so if we go even back further, let's say if it allows this now, nope, dismiss and edit. Now we don't want to go back to 1050. So we'll just fix this real quick. It has a control CTAF Unicom, and it has a clearance delivery, which may be correct. I have to check first if the airport really has a tower. We're jumping ahead a little bit here into the ATC section. You can see airport communication that has common traffic advisory frequency, Unicom. It doesn't have a tower, and in XPlane the convention is if an airport doesn't have a tower, it doesn't have ATC. That's why I didn't check the box here, and that's why we're going to just get rid of the clearance delivery, and we also get rid of, actually this should be enough already. Let me run the validation again. Yeah, okay, that's just a warning. We can deal with that. That's enough. You don't, the airplanes or XPlane's ATC, which is a subject of its own, doesn't work if there's no tower, and if there's no tower, you wouldn't need a clearance delivery. It doesn't support, getting clearance and then pick up IFR clearance as you get airborne and stuff like that. It doesn't work like that. So basically, we have the CTAF Unicom frequency in here, and we'll get to ATC later, but this clears the error, and we can now finally export our scenery pack. And I'm going to do that. I click on Export Scenery Pack, and I wave the warnings and proceed. And you don't get any confirmation that it worked. Now, the only confirmation that you would have is you would go back to your Sanford Lee folder and there it is, the earth-nav data, and if I open that, there's the airport DAT. We don't have a DSF yet, which is because we did not add any objects or anything that would go into the DSF file. So this is perfectly normal, but now we have the earth-nav data and we have an airport DAT, which means now as we would fire up XPlane, we would see our own airport. XPlane works like this. If you look at the custom scenery folder, why do I keep closing this? Yes, I just like to click. If you look at the custom scenery folder, you will get down here the so-called scenery packs ini. And in the scenery packs ini, if you open that, I do that with the nifty Notepad++. Nope, I don't want to download this now. You can see all the sceneries that XPlane detected. Every time you start XPlane, it will detect it. KTTA isn't in there because it wasn't detected yet. I haven't started up XPlane yet, but once I do, it will show up right here. It adds new stuff. It finds always to the top. And it basically works like this. If there are two versions of the same airport with the same scenery ID, like in our case KTTA, then it will only show the first one in the scenery packs ini. And since our new airport that we just made will show up right here in the top, it will suppress the other one, the old one, which is in the global airports folder. And you don't have to place exclusion zones to get rid of the old one. Once there are two versions of the same with the same airport ID, always the higher one wins and suppresses everything that is inside the or which is part of the one that is below it. So sometimes, I get lots of questions. Hey, I can't see my airport, and it's usually because the entry for some reason is below the other one, and then of course it will get suppressed. This is also an important concept to understand. Normally it will happen automatically, but some people mess with this or they have some organizers and it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to work, and then you can really mess yourself up. So now as we exported it, if I would fire up XPlane, I would see the new airport, and this is what concludes this first video. We have our airport, we have it saved, we can see it in XPlane, and on the next video we will finally really start working. So happy to have this done so far. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I'll get going on the next videos.